welcome back to the Resilience Pod, the podcast helping you become resilient in our world full of disruptions. You are here with me, your host, Rina Singh. Thank you so much for tuning in today. I am truly grateful. Now, today's podcast, the first of 2021, is all about D&I. What is that? Diversity and inclusion. Yes, stay with me on this because I know there's hundreds of things going on around the world that is linked to this, but here's really important. We're going to be talking about how this links to the resilience industry with my next guest, who, funnily enough, is a D&I diversity and inclusion expert and award winner. Yes, I only bring you the best, guys. She has experience driving diversity and inclusions in politics, the construction and legal sectors. Wow. And just to add to this, can I just say that she also has a BA honours in politics and international relations, and also an MA in human rights law from the School of Oriental and African Studies in London. Wow. She is also, in her free time, volunteers for the Girls Network and is a keen yogi and triathlete. Guys, I'm not talking about Wonder Woman here. So please welcome my very next guest on the Resilience Pod, Lucile Kamar. Hi, Lucile.
Hi, Rina. Really delighted to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Good. How are you doing?
Yeah, really great. It's a very exciting time for anyone working in diversity and inclusion. So I think talking about it today is so relevant and should be super interesting.
I'm so excited to have you on. Now, before we get into the kind of the nitty-gritties of what it is, I just want to pick up on that fun fact about you being a yogi and triathlete. Like, literally, you are probably my Wonder Woman here. Tell us a bit more about how you got into that.
I really believe that it's all about, but life is all about balance and, being able to ground yourself but also staying active and managing both the mind and connecting the mind and the body is super important to me. So that's really great. I started CrossFit this year over just between the two lockdowns. So yeah, it's been a challenge, but a very good one.
Fabulous. So not only do we have an award-winning D&I specialist, but also a very athletic lady with us. What an inspiration. Thank you so much for being on here. And we're going to get right into it now because I know you all want to know. And, I want to know this as well, because we hear the word diversity inclusion all the time, especially with everything going on in the world. But what does it actually mean? What is it?
And that's what's been so interesting about 2020 is that no one's been able to escape diversity and inclusion, but we're still not quite sure what it means. And people tend to think that diversity is only what's visible. Diversity is all the characteristics that make you who you are. So not only your gender, your ethnicity, but also if you have a visible or invisible disability, your sexual orientation, and going back to gender, not just the binary men and women gender, the whole breadth of different gender identity. Mental health is super important. And a lot of people tell me, I'm not a woman, I'm white, am I diverse? Well, yes, you are, because it's also about your accent, about your education. Are you a parent? So it's all the intersections and the layers that add up to make you who you are. And inclusion is, the very active, conscious act of making sure that people belong, that you listen to people, that you get that diversity of experiences. And there are many benefits for both people and organizations. And I think why, again, it's been so relevant today is how obviously Black Lives Matters have really put at the forefront issues of racial inequalities, how COVID has impacted women and BAME communities. So it's now more relevant than ever for us to have this conversation.
Wow, yeah, absolutely. And thanks for articulating it so clearly and making it understandable, because actually I didn't even realize that if you have like a different accent or are a woman but maybe you're white or a different ethnicity, like that can also be about diversity and inclusiveness. So that's really cool. Now, one thing I want to touch on also and ask you about is, we see a lot now on social media and everywhere online these pronouns being used about she, her, him, his, like all those kind of things. And I just find it really interesting that there's this that been like this sudden surge in using this. Like, what does it mean and why are people using it?
Yeah, and that's again really interesting, and it's really about respecting the others, really realizing that not making assumptions about any one gender, and you might present as a certain gender, but it doesn't mean that you might identify as non-binary, so neither man or woman, or you might be transgender. So it's really a sign of respect of the identity of the other. And a good way of introducing yourself, you could say, hi, my name's Lucile, my pronouns are she and her, what are your pronouns? And it's a good habit to pick up. It really shows that you're really understanding the other, you're making the effort. You know, the same thing when you're asking, you know, I'm not sure how you pronounce your name, because when you're mispronouncing the name, then again, you're not acknowledging the person for who they are. So I think we're really moving into that direction, which is really great.
Wow, that's really interesting. I'll definitely consider using that, and it's a great insight for anybody who has seen it around, especially on LinkedIn. You see it all the time, people are having this, so it's really important. And just going off little bit off topic here, the name pronunciations. I guess people with different ethnicities get this a lot. I mean, I get it. I get it all the time. Like, people don't say my name properly. It literally sounds like Tina. It's Rina, but I get all sorts. Rina, like Rihanna, like all sorts. And you think it's just simple, but actually there's a new feature online in most of the social media platforms that helps you pronounce your name in the proper way. Now, do you get people say your name incorrectly, and how do you feel about using those features on social media where you can actually pronounce your name in the way that you would like it to be said?
Yes, absolutely. You really make a very good point that it's so easy to get those pronunciations right, or to ask. Because when you mispronounce a name, you know, it can lead to a feeling of alienation and an exclusion, which is the opposite of what we're trying to create through belonging and inclusion. It also has an impact if you're in a meeting with someone and you don't know how to pronounce the name, so you just avoid it, which, you know, means that you're missing out on this person's contribution because you're just uncomfortable, you know, calling their name. So I think, again, it's okay not to know, and people actually would prefer you asking them how to pronounce their name as opposed to mispronouncing it. And it's okay to make a mistake, as long as, you know, you've rectified and you don't make it a habit. You know, in the same way that, you know, you might be, what we say about going back to the pronouns, misgendering people is when you call them by the wrong, if they're a non-binary individual or transgender, and you're still using their past name or their past identity. And again, that is what we call a microaggression, which can be, again, very detrimental in terms of mental health and ultimately how, you know, this individual feel included and feel that they can really contribute to the team, to society.
Gosh, who knew something as simple as that might cause so many other,
that's right,
I don't want to say insecurities, but just a whole host of other kind of issues. I mean, I still feel issues is the wrong word, but just a whole host of other emotions and feelings in someone that can make a huge impact. And that's why it's really important to have these discussions. And it links me to my next question to you is, well, you know, we're talking from a resilience perspective, and, you know, these people, my audience, it works primarily in the resilience sector. So is there a link between diversity inclusion and the resilience sector?
Yeah, and that's a great question, Rina. And I think there is indeed a link, both from an organizational perspective and an individual perspective. So there has been countless studies showing the positive business impacts of diversity and inclusion on organizations. So not only is it the right thing to do, but it makes business sense in terms of by bringing the diversity of perspective, you're avoiding groupthink. Your teams are better at problem solving, at creativity, at innovation, better at representing your customers or your clients. But there are also financial benefits that have been demonstrated for years and years. So like there is no reason why, by creating more resilient organization, ultimately it's about how they're able to innovate and stay fit and relevant for the future. And that's how I see resilience organization, and that direct link with having a diverse workforce. And with regards to resilience within individuals, there's this interesting concept of psychological safety, which is where you are able at work to voice your opinion. Do you feel safe proposing ideas, making mistakes? Are you, if you're not making mistakes and not being unfairly punished, are you able to take risks without being afraid or shamed or saying that you don't have the answers, for example? And if your needs are acknowledged, whether at work or outside of work, then you are more resilient. There's a big diversity and inclusion is also about reducing or eliminating the stigma around mental health as well. And again, there's a big link between how resilient individuals are and whether they have good or poor mental health. So absolutely, it's super relevant for anyone working in the resilience industry or in that role.
Well, that's a really great insight and an eye-opener to those of us who think, well, actually, it's not our job, like we don't care about it, it's like a department's job. Well, actually, it probably isn't, which brings me to my next question. I want to hear it from the experts' opinion, who is actually responsible for D&I, diversity inclusion in general?
Yeah, so that's very simple. It's everyone.
Yeah.
It's everyone, because we all have a responsibility to behave in a way that's respectful of others, but also because when you're trying to change a culture, ultimately a workplace culture is the sum of the behaviors that are rewarded, which I think is a very interesting concept. And in everyone, I talked about microaggressions earlier, and there's the flip side is the macroaffirmations. So microaffirmations are the small steps that you can do to really reinforce and make people feel comfortable. So if someone made a point during a meeting and someone else is stealing their ideas, then you can step up and say, oh, I think so and so made that point earlier. Making sure that if there is you're looking at the impact on a piece of work on a certain group, make sure that you've got those voices in the room. So I really believe that although, yes, ultimately there is a responsibility from the top to be accountable for progress, all of us really have a responsibility into educating ourselves and looking for the answers. I mean, sometimes the conversations can be quite uncomfortable, but that's where growth happens, right? Growth happens outside of your comfort zone. And I think now we've got so many great resources, we've got so many people who've been sharing stories about their lives, which make it a really great way for us to start educating ourselves.
Yeah, that's so on point there, and just another eye-opener or a reinforcement really for us to not just push it back to our teams in our organizations, but understand that we have a responsibility as an individual to be aware of it. Now, you don't need to go to extreme lengths, and stuff like that, and you don't need to do it just because you're of a diverse or inclusive background either. And like one of my pet peeves is that, and I think it's all done in a good way, but people say to me, oh yeah, you're an Asian woman, like you should be a D&I expert, or like, what do you think? And I'm like, well, I don't know. Just because I'm of an ethnic background, a different color, doesn't mean that I automatically am an expert in it, or I should have an opinion. So that's just me raging at the moment. But I feel that it's important for people to realize that actually you shouldn't really say those things and assume those things and ask open-ended questions, which then I want to ask you, my next question is then how do we consciously tackle that and be aware of that?
And again, the consciously is that very important part in that question, because you might be familiar, or your listeners might be familiar with unconscious bias. So unconscious bias are simply put shortcuts that our brain has created over the years, just because we receive millions of stimuli over the course of a single second. So to help us process and make decisions, our brain has created those shortcuts, which means that it's meant to keep you safe. It's meant, the brain is your main tool for survival. But where it becomes difficult is that your unconscious biases might impact the decisions that you're making, the thoughts or the assumptions that you make about people, about their capacities, or about the work that they can do or want to do. So consciously, we need to start being aware of all of our biases, and we all have them. That's natural. The good news is we can do something about it. We can identify towards or against which group we're biased. And interestingly, biases are more, or unconscious biases are more likely to happen when we're stressed, when we're tired, when we've got too much information, not enough information. And right now, in the current context, you're adding all of those situations that creates even more biases, which is why being super conscious about who's in the room, who's missing, and how decisions are affecting people. So right now, are you scheduling meeting too early for people with caring responsibility, or at lunchtime? So are you consciously or unconsciously excluding people? Going to the technical terms, that's indirect discrimination, where you're not doing purposely, but ultimately it has a negative impact on a certain population based on their needs or their characteristics.
Wow, that's a really interesting point, and I want to pick up further on the point you just made at the end, is actually like the inclusive part, because we hear a lot on the diversity part, but like just simple things like including people early or late or in lunchtime, that's really on point, especially as we are remotely doing this and remotely working. It's really, really important to bear that in mind. But actually, I think from an individual, we have a responsibility to make our boundaries known as well, because how do people know? So I definitely agree with you. It's a collective effort, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And what you were saying about people making assumptions that because of your ethnicity, you can speak on behalf of, but then it's missing out on the intersectionality. What makes you who you are is just more than being a woman or being Asian. And I think also the term BAME, for example, that we've heard quite a lot, is not helpful in the same way that LGBT is not helpful, because you're missing out on the specific experiences of certain groups, and that's part of, getting comfortable with the uncomfortable of talking about difficult topics that we're not used to talk about, that we might not know much about.
Yeah, quite right. And I you know what, when you say that word like babe, and you hear all these, like there's so many like initiatives, like books saying, all this like women specifically, we're talking about everything in general, but just women specifically, and like people getting offended by that. I just find reading all that stuff really interesting, and I really like your point about saying, well, actually it excludes a whole bunch of people. But what if you want to target it at a specific person, like you just doing something specifically for women? And I guess that's okay as long as you make it known.
Yes, but also as long as you understand that the experiences of women will be widely different, that the initiative also taking into consideration the needs of women with disabilities, the needs of mothers, the needs of BAME women, again, using BAME as an umbrella term. So you want to make sure that any of your initiatives aren't fixing the minorities. Because if your environment, is that image of you can put the fish in the water, but if the water is dirty or toxic, the fish is going to die, and you might put more fish in that water, but ultimately you need to fix the environment. You need to tackle, the behaviors that might not be inclusive or problematic.
Wow, I love that. How powerful is that? I'm going to leave it at that because I have nothing amazing to add to that. That is something we all need to think about. So if you're listening or watching us, take note. Now, my final question to you. I mean, I could ask you like all day about these questions, but what can we do to be part of this whole diversity inclusion initiative? I mean, not initiative, but just it's there. It's not even an initiative, it's in us. Like, how can we get involved and make that change?
Yeah, and again, there are very simple steps that anyone can take. Firstly is about educating yourself and believing voices, so everyone shares an experience with you. Listen and believe them. But equally, don't expect anyone whose background you're not familiar with to have the responsibility to educate you. There are fantastic resources online that are available for free. So do the work first and then ask the questions, but make sure you do ask the question. The second part is, once you've educated yourself, just be ready to go outside of your comfort zone, and you might make a mistake, but ultimately you need to be mindful about the impact. Your intent doesn't supersede the impact. Be quite mindful about, I didn't mean it that way. Well, the impact is still that you might have made a person feel excluded or unsafe. And then finally, do take action. That's where the people with a position of power, and it might be power in terms of access to resources, in terms of leadership capabilities, in terms of education as well. But for anyone with that privilege to act and take responsibility, moving into being actively anti-racist, being an ally to the LGBT community, really looking at what you can do to tackle social mobility, for example.
Yeah.
And that sounds like a lot, but actually when you break it down in small steps, it's actually really easy and straightforward.
They are fabulous. Thank you for that. I just love those. I think they're very easy to follow, and like you said, simple. And I'm sure there's loads of other things that we can do, but like you said, there's resources out there. So so thank you for that. If any of the listeners or people who are watching us have any questions or want to reach out, where can they find you, and are they able to contact you regards to this?
Yeah, absolutely. As you can tell, I'm incredibly passionate about the topic, and I think it is a conversation that will need to continue. It's really something, advancing diversity and inclusion is not something that we should take for granted.
Yeah.
It's really an everyday action. So please do reach me on LinkedIn at Lucile Kamar. That would be the easiest way to start that conversation and engage and really take actions and create change together.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you so much, Lucile, for sharing your insights and your experiences. It's been fabulous having you on the Resilience Pod.
Great. Thank you so much for the great conversation, Rina.
No problem. Thank you very much. Now, guys, thank you so much to each and every one of you who has tuned in today. You will agree that hearing about diversity and inclusion from someone who is not only an award winner, but has experience doing this and does this for every day as part of their job is so valuable. And as resilience professionals, we have a responsibility to do it, because actually at one point you'll be hiring someone in your teams indirectly or directly. So that's just the first very simple thing. So please bear that in mind. We do have a collective responsibility for diversity, inclusion, and educating ourselves on it. So hopefully this has helped. Thank you once again, Lucile. Now, guys, if you have enjoyed this, then please like and share and subscribe to the resiliencepod.com website and podcast. Join our LinkedIn family, and I will see you next time. Take care and keep on investing in your resilience.